Scott, before we get started, this is a really crazy, difficult news cycle.
Yes.
Every time you turn
absolutely.
around, there's something awful. There's Bondi Beach. There is Brown shooting. There is Rob Reiner. Or there is,
gosh.
by the way, in our own backyard, one of the most devastating natural disasters that we've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it has been really a lot for everybody, all of our listeners out there. And right now, KUOW is in its regularly scheduled winter fundraising drive. Yeah. So we are pivoting from covering that breaking news to talking about the fact that this is a nonprofit newsroom that we make this podcast from.
Yeah.
And we need people's support to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a really hard thing. You're covering, I mean, I've been talking to people who've lost their whole livelihoods and then you turn and you say, hey, don't forget, like, we got defunded by Congress. We want to be around in the future to cover all this important news, to bring you these important stories, to really try and show you the scale of what is happening. And I can't even tell you how many times, in recent days, elected officials have said, hey, thank you to the media for getting out the message of don't drive past a road closed sign. Don't make rescuers, like state rescuers, come out to have to rescue you. Those are important resources that we all need right now.
Heat evacuation notices,
It's really hard to pivot, but I think that it is all part of this same system of how we keep each other safe, how we keep each other informed. And I really hope that if you're listening now and you're thinking, I really do value KUOW, I really do value this politics podcast. I just haven't, in the past had the money, but you know what? Now is the time. I would say there is no better time than right now because honestly, we had a lot of rage giving, as we call it, earlier in this year, right?
Which is a short-term kind of thing,
When we got defunded by the president, by Congress, we had a lot of giving, and that was really amazing. Now we're almost in like a rage hangover, and we need the giving to continue to
I think
stay
it's
around.
That monthly sustaining membership that really helps KUOW a lot. But it's the end of the year. If it's a one-time gift, if it's monthly sustaining, whatever makes sense to you, there's a link in the show notes to make that gift, whatever is right for your budget. We know a lot of people are struggling right now. So thank you for anything you can pitch in to Sound Politics. And I think that's it. Let's get this show started.
That's right. It's time for Sound Politics.
Welcome to Sound Politics. I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. And I am really struggling to put the last week of, historic flooding. We keep using that word. It's because there's not very many good words. It's hard to put the last week into words.
Yeah. Widespread, historic, just a wall up to our region, and something that we are still dealing with every single day as the news is continuing to unfold.
Yeah, something Bob Ferguson, the governor, of course, said in a press conference yesterday is sticking in my head. Word for word, this is a very significant event in the history of our state, and that's an understatement. He also struggling, I think, to find words. He thanked the media actually for the images of flooding that, we've been sharing because it can be hard to illustrate it, I think, in words. Even with numbers, it's hard to communicate, more than a foot of rainfall in many places. It just does not feel, it feels like it falls, woefully short when we're talking about just the sheer amount of water that the state is under. Yeah,
the governor also mentioned, more than 1,000 people have been rescued so far.
There's evacuated quickly.
100,000 people at one point under an evacuation order. State and federal highways collapsed. That 49-mile swath of Highway 2 closed.
Right. For months, maybe?
Yeah, it looks like a huge slice, like a cake, has been taken out of it. There has been that one fatality. Sadly, the Snohomish man, 33 years old, who drove onto water on a closed road and he couldn't get out, and rescue divers couldn't get to him in time. I know, Scott, you've been out covering the flooding. Can you describe for people who haven't seen it themselves what you've witnessed?
lots of folks cleaning out their homes or wading through their homes. There is this one moment when I think about scale and trying to sort of communicate it. There's this one moment from Friday that keeps returning to me. I was right outside of Mount Vernon city limits. I was standing on Francis Road at a place where normally you see a farm, and then off in the distance, you usually can barely see the Skagit River. It's like half a mile away. And instead, I was standing at the edge of the Skagit River. The farm was sticking out of the water, road signs just sticking out of the water, and water as far as the eye could see. Obviously, so that's when I think about zooming out. But of course, a lot of the damage that I've been interviewing folks about is very, it's personal, right? It's zoom in stuff like homes, appliances, furniture, family photos.
And it's hard to imagine, but it could have been worse in a lot of areas. Like Mount Vernon, the flood wall held, the levee held.
Yeah.
There are places in King County. I mean, you saw the Green River levee breach and then the flood wall in Pacific. But honestly, there are many other places that were stressed and tested that did hold. And so as bad as it has been, we are in some ways lucky that certain flood barriers and levees didn't breach any further.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this whole situation has really thrown the state for a loop, particularly when we talk about something that was already in somewhat of a crisis mode, which is the state budget. The state is again looking at a multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, and Governor Ferguson, again, rewind to earlier this year, looking at cuts and saying that he doesn't like the idea of taxes to solve this problem. The question is he bluffing? Is it going to be a situation like last time where he said he doesn't want taxes, but, we end up seeing a budget signed with taxes? We have somebody here to talk about all of that who will be right in the mix as these decisions are getting made in the next session. Senate Majority Leader Jamie Pedersen represents Washington's 43rd District, which includes downtown Seattle, Capitol Hill, and the University District, where we are sitting right now. Senator, thanks very much for being back on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So first off, I know that you represent, parts of Seattle. We haven't seen as much of an impact of this horrible flooding event here in the city compared to our neighbors in outlying areas in different counties. You're from Puyallup, and I know that Puyallup is a place where rivers have been overflowing. Residents have evacuated, homes across the state getting damaged, property across the state getting damaged. What have you been feeling when you've been watching all of this, and what are your thoughts about what the state is going through right now?
Wow. Yeah, there are a lot of people who are suffering, and it's funny. I think the thing that strikes me about it is how uneven it is. Everybody's been experiencing rain, but for some of us, it's just kind of like, oh, it's raining out, and then another day it's clear. And for some people, it's just wiped out their lives, their possessions. They've lost their investments in their houses, their businesses. You've got a whole set of people whose lives and economic fortunes depend on Highway 2, who are now completely isolated, and there's just no idea that we have about how we're going to be able to reestablish that road. So maybe this happens all the time and we're just not so brutally aware of it, but just that idea of how differently the same event can affect different people is really what is most striking to me.
It's really incredible. I drove back from Sumas on Saturday night and had been talking to folks. That city or town, I should say, it's about 1,500 people right next to the Canadian border. And, it was a lake just a few days ago, and people were still, getting sludge out of their homes. I come home to Seattle and drive up and park and get out of my car, and there's like a rave going on in the church next to my house, which, it's Saturday night. But it was so strange. I totally feel that same unevenness. Yesterday, you stood a few feet away from Governor Ferguson at a press conference in Seattle as he talked about, state money, right? Relief money that the state wants to give to people for groceries and diapers. The state government is facing this huge budget shortfall as we move into next year. now, we have this wrench in it, the historic floods and water damage that are higher than we can calculate yet. I overheard the governor this weekend saying to Representative April Berg, I think, I don't even want to think about how much it's going to cost. He did say yesterday.
The governor said, I don't want to think about how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
Wow.
I overheard it. Yeah, he was like, I don't even want to think about it. I think he knew I was listening because I was standing there with my mic, but it also was a moment of yeah, this is going to be bad. We were standing in the middle of a field in Snohomish County. Yesterday at the press conference you were at with Governor Ferguson, he said he's authorized, just $3.5 million of state money right away to help people affected by the disaster. And he's working with members of the legislature to unlock additional state dollars as soon as the session begins in January. I assume you're one of those folks that he's working with. Where is that additional money going to come from, given these huge budget constraints that already exist?
So, look, I think we need to talk about we need to start being precise about different buckets, right? So, first of all, we have a set of, I don't mean to minimize the challenges that are coming from the flood, but the flood damages are a set of one-time problems, right? And we have a decent amount of one-time money sitting around. So, we've got, I don't know, $1.5 billion or something like that sitting in what we refer to as the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah.
All too appropriate right
exactly,
now.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, so, one of the things that I said to the governor yesterday was, wow, if there's a lesson that comes out of this for me, it's that you're scraping around the couch cushions to find $3.5 million so that you can get it to people who need help immediately. And with appropriate constraints, whether that's four-corner authorization, meaning the leaders of the minority and majority in both chambers, or something else, there ought to be a way for us in the presence of a disaster on the scale that we're seeing right now to allow the governor to have some more flexibility about spending. So, it seems pretty obvious to me, but I'm not going to speak for where the governor is going to come out in terms of his approach, but it seems pretty obvious to me that we've got plenty of money for the immediate emergent needs sitting in the budget stabilization account, and we can take care of that. Now, you certainly don't want to use that money for ongoing problems, right? Because it'll run out very quickly. So that pot of money is not a solution for the longer term challenges that we have. So that's bucket number one, are those emergent needs. Then you've got a 2026, it's actually fiscal year 27, but the period left in the biennium that we did a budget for that we, finished in April. We have a shortfall in that budget, and that's also a different set of problems from the longer term problem, right? Partly because our runway is short to solve the problem, right? There's no major revenue that we can do that will take effect in time to help out with the current biennium. Now, there are little things like we could increase the cigarette tax, for example, and that'd probably bring in $100 million in the current biennium because it can happen fairly quickly. But that's why the governor is saying, and I agree with him, I think that's just a reality, that more taxes are not a solution to the current budget shortfall. What we don't know yet is how big that shortfall is. It went from, we had a balanced budget when we left in April. By June, largely because of federal actions and the drag on the economy from the tariffs and other things that the federal government is doing, our revenue forecast had deteriorated, and we were looking at a $400 million shortfall in the current biennium. And then by the November forecast, that had corrected itself
gotten a little
largely.
better.
Yeah, so we're at $105 million in the hole that we need. And that's the piece that we absolutely need to solve, right? That's not a multi-billion-dollar problem. That's something that with appropriate cuts and some shifts of money around and maybe some little revenue pieces, we can solve that. And then we have a third bucket of problems, which is the longer term trajectory of the state budget. And that's where we have a structural problem because we have revenue sources, 50% comes from sales tax, 25% from business taxes, 10% from property tax, and then the remaining money comes from a series of other little taxes, capital gains, real estate excise tax. We have a revenue system that's growing, and your listeners can't hear this, but, slowly.
There's a slight slope. Is that accurate to what your hand is doing
there?
there?
You kind of look like you're about to dab, It's like a slight, it's just a slight upturn, yeah.
Revenue is not growing fast enough,
revenue's not growing, enough is a subjective thing. What you can say objectively is revenue is not growing as quickly as our costs are growing, and those are all the same costs that everybody's facing. That's labor costs, the cost of healthcare for our workforce and for the people of the state, right? So just to keep doing the things that we have been doing, we don't have enough money. And so we've been in this perpetual cycle of trying to fight just to stay even, let alone make the kinds of investments in our state that we believe the people want us to be making. Right, so that is I think each of those are all fiscal problems, but each of those problems it has a distinct set of causes and a distinct set of potential solutions.
So I have a couple of questions for you on that. One is, what I'm hearing you say is you agree with the governor that in our short-term shortfall, which you're putting at about $100 million.
Well, right now it's $105 million.
$105 million.
We don't. Obviously, we'd like to have a little bit more than that to have a cushion, and then of course we don't know. That's the rules of the road for the governor and his budget. We will have a different set because we'll get a different revenue forecast in February.
Got it.
And it's anybody's guess. Will that keep correcting and get slightly better? Will it deteriorate rapidly and suddenly we have $1 billion problem? I don't know.
So regardless, there is that short-term bucket, and you are in line with the governor when it comes to you can't be looking at big new revenue sources that will take a long time to come online in order to fix that. That is an immediate challenge that's going to take likely cuts primarily, as I'm seeing you nod to that. So the question I have for you then is, for this long-term structural challenge for our revenue and costs, are you looking this session at the fixes that are on the table, these bigger ideas of adding a new tax on, for example, income over $1 million, the millionaires tax?
We are absolutely looking at that because
for this session.
For this session, yes,
mm-hmm.
because that's against the conventional political wisdom, which says it's a short session in election year. You want to stay away from anything with the T word involved in it, right?
All the members of the House and half of the Senate up for re-election, and it's a short one, like
including
Scott
yourself.
Said.
You're also up for re-election.
And I will also be up for re-election. Yeah, but look, here's the thing. I mentioned the runway before, right? The opposite is a converse is true, right? That the longer you give yourself to solve a problem, the more gentle the slope can be for getting that problem done. So we could just ignore the fact that we have a bigger problem coming in 2027 and in 2029 this year and say, oh, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. If we can get the consensus around putting some changes in place for this session, and that could be everything from saying, hey, we're going to shut down some major program, right, because we can't afford it anymore, to we're going to create some new revenue source. The sooner that we can get that into effect, the more likely we are to have a manageable set of problems when we return in 2027.
We have to take a really quick break here. You're listening to Senate Majority Leader Jamie Pedersen, Democrat from Seattle. We are talking about the next legislative session in Olympia and what potential new revenue could be on the way. We're going to get right back to that. See you back here in just a minute. We're back here with my Sound Politics co-host Scott Greenstone and Senate Majority Leader Jamie Pedersen, Democrat from Seattle. And, we wanted to keep talking about this revenue idea. Scott, and I know you had a question about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Democrats, have messaged for years now that they want wealthy Washingtonians to pay their fair share, as they say. There are two proposals that we've heard about, that we've talked about on this show to, tax the rich, for lack of a better word. There's a wealth tax and an income tax. The wealth tax is similar to what former Governor Jay Inslee proposed on his way out the door last year around this time.
Was that only last year?
Yes.
This has been the longest year. Oh my gosh.
It's a tax on assets like, cash, stocks, bonds that are held globally. There's also an income tax proposal on the table, but I want to start with this wealth tax question. How feasible do you think that tax is? Because there are questions about its legality, but there's also questions about the implementation of it. Like, I think the state would need to hire auditors for it. What is your thought?
Well, the auditors piece, I think, is not the real problem, right? Almost any new tax, you're going to have a set of enforcement mechanisms and figure that out.
Which is one reason Governor Ferguson is saying we can't, rely on new taxes for this session because it's going to take a minute to stand those up. You got to hire people to enforce.
Yeah, I mean, the feasibility question with the wealth tax is slightly different. Now, would it be fair? It would absolutely be fair. Would it be effective at raising revenue? I think that's a big question because we can't and are not going to build a giant wall around the state to keep all of the people who are here from moving. So what you're really talking about is, it depends where you draw the line. Is it people who have more than $100 million of assets or more than $1 billion of assets as it was originally proposed? The way the tax would work is that you would have to be domiciled in the state of Washington for your global assets to be that intangible property to be taxed. There's no question that we have the authority to impose the tax. The question, or at least I don't think there's any legitimate question about that. The question is, could we actually collect it, right? And so if you have, I won't name names, but if you had somebody local here who happened to own $150 billion worth of assets,
someone
for example,
named Steve or Bill.
Well, just to say, yes, somebody like that. The reality for people who have that level of assets, and I'm not trying to defend this or say that it's right or fair, but the reality is they have homes in a lot of places. They spend a lot of their time traveling the globe. They might own a basketball team in a different state, for example.
You're referencing Steve Ballmer, the Clippers.
So then the question is, if to be domiciled in Washington, you have to be here present, you have to have your voter registration, you have to be here a majority of the year, 183 days, and then you've got a set of people who have homes in 11 states and 3 other countries, and probably in the ordinary course, they're already traveling for 4 or 5 months out of the year, and they come home to their home base here. Really, are they going to pay $1.5 billion a year for the privilege of being an extra 30 days in the state of Washington? I think there are a lot of people
that will
who
drive people to change their residency.
Well, look, we have right now an ongoing test of this question because in the last session, we passed a change to the estate tax that made the marginal rate for our estate tax 35%. The next highest estate tax top marginal rate in the country is Hawaii at 15%. So we now have a rate that is more than 2 times the next highest rate. And we know from estate planning lawyers and tax planning accountants that we have essentially a rush of people figuring out how to re-domicile themselves into other states.
Like Hawaii?
No.
Oh, I see.
Places where there's no estate tax, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you would be a
like
terrible
Florida,
estate tax lawyer, Scott.
Oh no! What does this mean for my estate?
Well, and I think it'll probably be a while before, if we don't make a change to the estate tax, it'll probably be a while before we start to see that show up in estate tax collections. But we're going to have a sort of canary in the coal mine with the capital gains tax because a lot of the same people would be paying capital gains tax, right? So I think it's not an overblown or ridiculous concern that the people who would pay the wealth tax are ones who may not stick around to pay it, right? And that although it may feel good and fair to impose that tax, it may not actually solve our budget problem.
And we could lose the capital gains tax that they're already paying.
And we could lose the capital gains tax that they're paying.
So that's the issue of people with a lot of intangible assets. So, 50 million, 100 million, $1 billion in stocks and bonds and things like that. The income tax on millionaires, so every dollar over $1 million that somebody is taking in, that's something I mentioned earlier. Would that have the same effect, do you think, if Washington state imposed that style of tax?
Yeah, so here, look, is the funny thing. Washington, if you think about the ways in which our tax system is unusual, we have a pretty high set of business taxes, right? And especially the payroll taxes that we have for unemployment insurance, for paid family medical leave, for long-term care. Those put us in the top few states in terms of the total business tax burden. We're unusual in having a state property tax. In most states, property taxes are just local taxes. And we have a significant state property tax that's dedicated to funding public schools.
Is that all? That's all workarounds because we have the constitutional prohibition on an income tax, right?
Well, we don't have. So let's be really precise about this. We don't have a constitutional prohibition on an income tax. What we have is two restrictions on property tax that are built into our Constitution. One that says that property taxes have to be imposed uniformly across a class of income, or across a class of property, and a second that says that property taxes cannot exceed 1%. Now, 90 plus years ago, when the whole idea of an income tax was very new, the federal income tax had been in effect only for 18 years. Our state Supreme Court decided that income was a form of property, and therefore the constitutional restrictions on property tax applied to income tax. So we could have a flat 1% income tax, no problem. There's no question that we could have an income tax. It just doesn't raise very much money, and it probably wouldn't be super popular.
And,
right?
The Democrats, your party, I think you yourself voted to ban income taxes after the Let's Go Washington initiative.
Yeah, I mean,
bust.
Look, that was, what did Mary Poppins call that? A pie crust promise, right? Easily made, easily broken. Like, as we put that language into statute, and we can amend it anytime that we want to, right? So I wouldn't take that super seriously. If we find that we need to tweak that, we'll just tweak it, right? And so the other way that I mentioned, a couple of ways that we're different from the vast majority of other states. The other way that we're different from the vast majority of other states is we don't have any income tax at all. 43 states have some form of income tax. 41 states have a personal income tax. And in almost all of those states, the tax burden for individuals, particularly for individuals making more than $1 million, is higher than 9.9 or 10% that we are exploring as a possibility for us.
That would be the amount that every dollar after $1 million would be taxed 9.9%.
So a 0% rate all the way up to $1 million a year of non-capital gains tax or non-capital gains income. And then after that, you pay 9.9% after that. So we're looking at that. Now, if you're somebody who would have to pay that tax, then you think, oh, I'm really mad about this. Well, I'm going to move. Well, where are you going to move? You're not going to move to California or Oregon or Colorado or Illinois or Minnesota or Massachusetts or New York or New Jersey or Connecticut or
We're hearing a lot of people going to Texas, though.
Yes, you could move to Texas, Florida, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nevada, New Hampshire. There we have 9 other states where you wouldn't have to pay any income tax. Probably if that was your main motivation, you've already moved. I think the vast majority of people who are here because they want to be here. And, they may grumble, but ultimately they're going to feel like, I can probably afford to pay. And particularly in an environment where those same people, and just to be clear, when we're talking about $1 million or more of non-capital gains income, we're talking about 20,000 households out of 4 million in the state who would have to pay this tax. And by the way, it raises more than $3 billion a year. And I think for the vast majority of those folks, they're just going to say, well, it's a little inconvenient, but I actually saved more money than that from the passage of the H.R. 1 by the federal government.
Obviously, any kind of income tax, even if it's on folks who make over $1 million, will be fiercely fought in the courts. This is going to be an ongoing battle. As you said, the state Supreme Court has ruled in the past that we cannot have an income tax in Washington state. Why do you think this would be different?
Well, so, just to be clear, we have three separate fronts that we have to fight in this battle. So first is in the legislature and with the governors. We all have to come to alignment. Second, we would need to fight an initiative on this almost certainly and almost immediately after the session. I would expect that would be on the 2026 ballot. We have done some research, and it looks pretty favorable. I think people are understanding more and more about the structural budget problem that we're facing. They also have a really strong sense of how unfair the tax system is. And we saw that, I think, in the results on the capital gains tax, where close to 2/3 of the people of the state of Washington voted to uphold what was loudly proclaimed to be an income tax, the capital gains income tax.
I just want to be clear, though. What you're saying is you think that voters since, say, like 2010, when they sent an income tax to the flames they died with over 60% voting against it, you think voters have come around and now would pass an income tax?
I think that a properly structured tax, right? So one that doesn't hit most people, but that hits people who can really afford to pay more. And this is a critical piece, some of the proceeds of which are used to reduce more regressive taxes. I think we can sell that to the public.
Which was similar to 2010. That 2010 tax was
supposed to ease up property taxes, I think.
Things like that, yeah. And it was 200,000.
So, look, what has my time in the legislature been about? The two things that I have worked on the hardest and the most are gun violence prevention and marriage equality, right? In 1997, over 60% of the voters rejected Initiative 676, which was a gun control measure, and rejected Initiative 677, which was an anti-discrimination law that would have protected against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Over 60%. 38 out of 39 counties voted against that. King County voted against protecting gay people from being fired from their jobs in 1997. And 15 years later, the voters passed marriage equality, right? So, yes, we are capable of shifting as people learn more and as we have more conversation. 15 years have passed since the failure of Initiative 1098, and I think we're ready to have that conversation.
What about the jumpstart tax idea? The Representative Sean Scott has put it forward.
We've talked about taxing people, and you mentioned the payroll tax in Seattle. A lot of folks, want to tax corporations more. Representative Sean Scott has suggested this Well Washington Fund idea. Are you concerned proposals like that are going to encourage companies to move jobs outside the state, like critics have said?
I think if you watch what has happened in the sort of tug of war between employment in Seattle and employment on the east side, that we have real reason to believe that employers are responsive to those signals from the government.
They're moving the jobs to Bellevue, you think?
Yes, yeah. I think we have witnessed that.
Yeah.
But wouldn't a statewide jumpstart tax then even that playing field so that Bellevue and Seattle aren't in a tug of war?
Well, it would certainly even the playing field as between Seattle and Bellevue, depending on how it was structured. I mean, if Seattle got full credit, if Seattle got full credit and the tax only applied to Bellevue, right? I'm not sure that that's politically feasible. It doesn't do anything about the problem of whether employers would choose to locate jobs in Austin or Silicon Valley or Boise or someplace else.
Or Canada, Vancouver, BC.
So I've heard loud and clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it seems like what you are thinking is most feasible and most productive for the state, most likely to help fix a long-term fiscal challenge that the state is facing, is this millionaires tax.
I would say that is the best hypothesis that I personally have come up with for right now. Which, look, there's no guarantee that we'll be able to do anything in a short session in election year. And we have a lot of pieces to work out in terms of the logistics of such tax, what the money would be deployed for, and what offsetting, lowering of regressive taxes we would do. But yes, I would say for me, where I am right now, I think that is the best answer that we have on the table to the long-term problem about our tax structure and the structural deficit that we're facing.
And that session that you're describing starts on January 12th. Senate Majority Leader Jamie Pedersen represents Washington's 43rd District, which includes downtown Seattle, Capitol Hill, and the University District. Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And that's it for Sound Politics today. Our show is produced by Hans Anderson. Our editor is Kat Smith, and I'm Libby Denkmann.
And I'm KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone. This show, we'll say it again for the folks in the back, it's only possible because of your support. Please consider a donation to keep us going at KUOW.org/politics. That link is in the show notes. You don't have to memorize it, thank God. KUOW.org/politics. And we will see you next week.
Thanks for listening, everybody.